Hello, welcome everyone. We're going to get started in just a little bit, just having everyone come in to the Zoom room. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tomoko Kanemitsu, and I'm the Barbara and Stephen Vermouth Director of Public Engagement at SFMOMA. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to this artist talk with Wendy Red Star. This program was made possible by the generous support of the Phyllis Wattis Fund. I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement. The Ramaytush Ohlone are the original inhabitants and stewards of this land we call San Francisco and have never ceded or surrendered their traditional territory. SFMOMA is located on this land and respectfully acknowledges past, present, and future generations of the Ramaytush Ohlone. We invite you to collectively reflect on our relationship and responsibility to this land and to its history and people. As cultural workers at SFMOMA, we are committed to upholding Indigenous rights, racial justice, and cultural equity through our exhibitions and programs and strengthening our relationships with the community. This is a living land acknowledgement, and we will continue to revise and strengthen it in collaboration with community members. For today's talk with Wendy Red Star, she'll be in conversation with Shana Lopes, Assistant Curator of Photography at SFMOMA. After their conversation, they'll be taking some audience questions. Feel free to use the Q&A feature that's at the bottom toolbar of your Zoom window to submit questions throughout the talk. SFMOMA staff will also be in the background to answer any questions related to Zoom or general museum questions. This talk is also live captioned, and you can move the live caption around on your screen by drag and drop. I also want to thank Cristo Oropeza, Emily Chow, and Mirbai Knight for all their behind the scenes magic. And it's my pleasure to introduce Shana.
Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Shana Lopes, and I'm an Assistant Curator of Photography at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. I'm the co-curator of Constellations, Photographs in Dialogue, which opened to the public in November and will be on view until August 21st. The exhibition explores how additions to the collection expand, deepen, and complicate the stories a museum can tell. It weaves together historical and contemporary voices to bring fresh narratives to light. Constellations features the work of Wendy Red Star, with whom I'll be in conversation with this evening after her artist talk. Her project's 4 Seasons, a recent acquisition, was the inspiration for one of the galleries I organized about the politics of self-portraiture. The first time I saw her 4-part photographic series, I was struck by its wit, incisiveness, and downright brilliance. Drawing from her childhood on the Crow reservation in Montana, Wendy Red Star upends the Natural History Museum trope in which Native Americans stand frozen alongside taxidermy animals. Instead, she underscores the vitality of her Indigenous culture and Crow community. Her work lies somewhere in between photography, performance, and sculpture, and is currently on view not only at SFMOMA, but also at the Broad in Los Angeles, the Anderson Collection at Stanford, and the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago. I just want to briefly thank Tomoko, Cristo, Emily, Epiphany, and of course, Wendy for making this event happen. I feel really lucky that we're able to speak tonight. And without further ado, please welcome Wendy Red Star.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me? Yes, okay. Such an honor to be here. Thank you so much, Shana, for that introduction. I feel incredibly honored to be part of the exhibition that's up at SFMOMA, especially with my work, The 4 Seasons. That's a work that I'm excited to talk about. I don't think I've actually ever written a statement on The 4 Seasons, and it has such a long history for me as a body of work. But before I get into that, I just wanted to thank Tomoko, Emily, and Cristo as well for helping to bring this all together. And yeah, let's get started with some of my earliest portraits. First slide, please. So I went to school at UCLA between 2004 to 2006. And I was looking at a lot of archival photos of just Native people, including my own community. And one of the things I think that really struck me is that I often would see lots of Native portraits done, but not a lot of identities to the sitter. At most, it might be a tribal affiliation. Sometimes it wouldn't even be a tribal affiliation. And so I decided I wanted to create like portraits utilizing what I was seeing and also sort of capturing those titles. So this is a first portrait inspired by looking through those archival materials and using some of the titles that are literally used to talk about Native people. So this is Indian woman sitting. And then we can go to the next slide. And this is Indian woman standing. And I was also really struck by the cultural clash of like the European settings, the rugs, the chairs, that sort of really kind of showed you the difference between these two societies. So that was something that I always found the tension to be really powerful and strong and interesting, and something that I really liked to contend with. Another work I did, we can go to the next slide, is called The Last Thanks. And this body of work, I think also being in Los Angeles and Hollywood, I was really intrigued by Hollywood sets, going out to different vintage shops and realizing that I could actually rent some of the furniture and things like that. So that was like a real kind of interesting source of inspiration. But for this particular piece, I remember I couldn't go home for Thanksgiving and I was missing Thanksgiving. And then I started to really think about Thanksgiving, and I thought of it as the Last Supper for Native people. And so with that, I just sort of combined those two ideas. The entire set actually was constructed either through purchasing materials from, I think it was a catalog where teachers could buy materials for classrooms. So the skeletons and the headdresses, all of that came from that catalog. And then I sourced the other materials. But one of the things that really kind of struck me about thinking about Thanksgiving and the Thanksgiving meal is that on my reservation in Montana, the Crow Reservation, I'd often go to my grandma's house in the morning and she would cook us Spam. And all the things that are on the table were sort of representative of what I grew up eating in her household, and what was available within her budget and our family's budget. And it was just sort of setting up Native people for continued sort of health issues and things like that. This body of work, it's just one photo, was a lot of fun for me, and it was interesting to pull different sort of materials, and each thing in the image is sort of speaking to different areas within that story. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. And then towards the end of my 2 years there, I created this iconic body of work called The Four Seasons. Next slide, please. So here they are. And this work actually, again, I think there's something so interesting for me. I grew up on the reservation. I left when I was 18 to attend college. And then I've lived off the reservation ever since. My father's still there, and I visit multiple times during the year. But what I found within that distance is a lot of reflection for me, a lot of being able to sort of step back and analyze certain things and situations that when I was growing up it was just the way it was and living. So for me, again, it was missing my community in grad school. And then I thought, oh, if I want to find something of home, I bet if I go to the Natural History Museum, I will be able to find some crow materials. And this is me when I was 25, thinking this, not deeply thinking about really what that meant. And so I took a trip to the Natural History Museum in Los Angeles. And I walked into that institution and I was confronted with a big dinosaur exhibit. And I walked under a brontosaurus. It was very dark. And then I went into the native galleries, which were just off sort of the main entrance after the dinosaur exhibit. And was searching, and I found a pair of crow moccasins. And then after I sort of took that in, I looked around at everybody who was visiting the museum and looking at the native objects. And I realized that we had been set up. The institution had set us up to think that these Indigenous communities no longer exist, to have us right next to the dinosaur bones. And I knew that I myself have my entire traditional crow outfit just a few miles away. And so from there, I just sort of walked through the rest of the museum, went through the dioramas. A lot of them looked like Montana landscapes. And then from there, this piece was born, the Four Seasons, in which I created these dioramas. We can go to the next slide. So this is fall. And I got really interested in trying to figure out on my budget how I could get animals. And what I found was these online hunting stores, which I never knew anything about. And so this alien figure is actually a blow-up elk. And it doesn't make any sense to me. I had no idea that hunters could buy a blow-up elk and then take it out into the wilderness. And it actually has Velcro that you can strap to a tree. And I don't know what elk would ever be tricked by something like this. So all of the animals come from these online hunting stores. They're all hunting decoys. We can go to the next slide. And this is winter. And these weren't all done they were done fairly close together, but I would shoot one and then a couple weeks might go by where I was trying to gather material. So they also sort of kind of developed too. So fall was the first one to be shot. We can go to the next slide. And this is spring. And these backdrops are 70s photo mural backdrops from eBay. And they actually come in these little rectangles. So you can see the seams and some of the thumbtacks that I used to set them up. And then the next slide. And this is Indian summer. Again, with the 70s photo mural backdrop. And then it was just a lot of trips to Michael's. I just kept going to Michael's. And there was a great trick that all the grad students had where if you kept the tags on, you could return things. So all the flowers have the tags on them. So it's all sort of with in this budget of trying to make this idea and artwork come to life. But with that, I had this really kind of complicated relationship with this work, and that it's actually been quite incredible. And I almost refer to it as its own entity. It has shown far and wide, and it's in many collections. And I think early on in my career, I had sort of a feeling of that it was too powerful, in a sense that everybody wanted something like the Four Seasons, or only wanted to show the Four Seasons. And then as I matured and continued on to my practice, It's almost like we're in partnership. And so it's been sort of this really interesting experience to have artwork like this as an artist. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. I'm a mom. I have a daughter. Her name's Beatrice, and she's 14. But we had a collaborative practice when she was 7, where we would do tours of museums, and she would lead the tours as a tour guide. And we did that until she was about 11. But one of the tours that we gave, we also pitched that she would recreate a season, almost like she was an intern. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. And so this was really fun. So I basically handed her all the sort of ingredients on how to make a season. And so she and I were, on the internet, on eBay, selecting the exact backdrop that she wanted. We went to Home Depot and we got the grass. And then we went to Michael's. And then we also selected all the different animals that she wanted. And so this is at Tang Teaching Museum. And we installed it. We could go to the next slide. And this is her at the end of the day, at the end of installing the artwork. Then on top of that, we switched it around, where in the 4 seasons, I was the subject in my traditional Crow regalia. It was really important for me at the time, making the 4 seasons, to actually feel that experience of being an Indigenous body presented in a sort of a natural history landscape. I really wanted to confront that feeling. And then for my daughter, I wanted her to sort of empower herself and turn the lens around. So for her, what we did was then we invited the museum goers to come in and be the subject, and she photographed them. So we can go to the next slide. We actually did this at the Denver Art Museum as well. And so this is her photographing different participants that would come in. And then we created like a whole sort of photo collage of the photos at the end, and the participants also got a photo. So that was just sort of a very wonderful experience to have that with her. And then hired herself at age 11. We can go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, I sort of made that bet with myself to go to the Natural History Museum and see if there was crow fangs. And I actually knew that there probably was crow fangs. And as I got older, I've asked myself, well, why would you think that, Wendy? Why would you think there would be crow fangs? And that's not normal. It's not normal for you as a person to know that there's something of your community and an institution, historical items. And what I found that throughout my traveling and working with various institutions, especially institutions that have Native galleries, is that I always run into crow objects. And it just goes to show how much of our material culture has been taken, collected, and brought into not just museums in the United States, but also in Europe as well. And so I really think that making the 4 seasons was my first sort of inquiry into the work that I'm doing now, where I am actually deep into the archives and unearthing these histories that have been suppressed. So we can go to the next slide. So this is at the National Museum of the American Indian in DC. And this is just a photo of just a tiny little snapshot of all the crow objects. I believe they have over 1,000 objects, which I was able to see And as part of this, I did a Smithsonian Research Artist Fellowship where I looked at this collection. I looked at the National Anthropological Archives and the Natural History Museum. But in this particular collection, I started giving the collections manager names within my family. And through those names, they had over 100 objects that were directly biologically related to me. So I was actually able to hold things that were of my great-great-grandfather. His name is Beartail. I found a fourth great-grandfather. His name was Greenskin. And I also found my great-great-grandma, who I'll talk about a little bit more. But it was through this that then, started to be able to find objects related, physical objects to photos. So we can go to the next slide. So this two photos from a series called the 1880 Crow Peace Delegation, which featured Crow chiefs who traveled to Washington, D.C. to meet with the president in 1880. And this particular chief, his name is Two Belly. The literal translation of his name in Crow is has a pregnant belly, which is super interesting. But the amazing thing about this particular photo and finding an object is that he's wearing this beautiful floral beaded leather jacket with otter trim fur. And it actually sort of mimics the Western coats that were being worn around that time. And at the Portland Art Museum, I was able to find a very similar style jacket to what Two Belly's wearing in 1880. So we can go to the next slide. And this is an example of one of the beautiful floral beaded jackets. And there's something about that just really clicks for me. The other thing is when I first saw this jacket, I was like, this is not Crow. I'd never seen anything like this and what Crows are beading and making today. So I'm constantly being humbled all the time within the archive, but I'm also realizing, these objects are out of our community, and our community is losing this sort of precious knowledge of actually what we had. We can go to the next slide. Here's another example. I'm sort of obsessed with these things. They're like a little switch, and they're made out of buffalo hair. And I found a photo of Chief Balrock, and he's actually a chief from the town that I grew up in Portland, and he's holding one. And then we can go to the next slide. And towards the end of my Smithsonian Artist Research Fellowship, which I did between, I think, 2018 and 2019, I sort of ended that trip looking at through photos. And I had already been pulling up names through my genealogy. And I pulled up this name called Dreams the Truth. And I was like, this is such a beautiful name. And she would be my grandmother's grandma. And so I was looking through photos and I saw this photo, and luckily it was written, there was a descriptor of her. The photographer's name is Fred Miller, and it said Dreams the Truth, AKA Julia Bad Boy. And I flipped out. I was like, this is my great-great-grandma. I'd never seen her, and she looks very much like my grandma. So on the side is just actually a census record from 1885, and it shows you who her father is, her mother, and then some of her siblings, and she's highlighted in the yellow. And this has actually been a great source of inspiration for a few different art projects. We can go to the next slide. This lithograph, which I created at Crow Shadow Institute of the Arts. And this is really part of a genealogy project. So I've highlighted other ancestors of mine in lithographs with star quilts. And then we go to the next slide. I was in a group show at the Cleveland Art Museum and was commissioned to do an artwork. And what I wanted to do was really build a legacy for my daughter. And I was thinking about my ancestors and how they kept popping up through the arts and how there's echoes of them within me. So the title of this work is called Omnia, and that means echo in Crow. And I was thinking I'm also an echo and my daughter's an echo. So I decided to create these sort of echoing bust portraits. We can go to the next slide, of myself and my daughter. And the beautiful thing is, this is my daughter, I think when she was 13, she agreed to come out of retirement to do this. And I made dresses very similar to what my great-great-grandma was wearing. We're wearing similar jewelry. We have our hair done in the Crow style that Crow women would do. And I took my daughter's portrait and she took my portrait. So it was sort of this very lovely thing. We can go to the next slide. Let's go to the next slide. And then fast forward to some very, very recent work, and this work is actually showing at the Broad. And it originated out of solo exhibition at the Joslyn Art Museum, which is in Omaha, Nebraska. And I was focused on an event that happened called the Indian Congress in 1898, which was part of the Trans-Mississippi Exposition in Omaha, Nebraska. And there's a photographer, we can go to the next slide, associated with that event, who took photos of the Indian Congress. And the Indian Congress, the exposition created like sort of a living village where they invited over 30 different tribes to come, including my tribe. And there were over 500 Native people, and Frank Reinhardt photographed most of them. The beautiful thing was he put their names and their tribal affiliations on their photos. We can go to the next slide. And what you're seeing on the right is an original, a copy of an original photo portrait. And then all these stacks of portraits that I decided I wanted to cut out. And then on the left is actually one of the displays at the exposition. So I decided I wanted to combine sort of these factors of what was happening at the exposition. And then I also really wanted to feel the power of having over 500 Native people in one group and what that would feel like. And so I created the Indian Congress, but there was another layer to this work. This photographer actually ended up traveling to my reservation like a year or a couple years after this event and photographed 2 miles away from where I grew up. We can go to the next slide. And let's go to the next slide. And this is where he photographs. So this is my father, and he's pointing exactly where Frank Reinhardt came and photographed my community. We can go to the next slide. And the next slide. This is my daughter, and this is one of Frank Reinhardt's photos. I think that is bird all over the ground. This is a person. And then let's go to the next slide. And here's the installation, the next slide. And the very back is actually the only photograph that I took, and it's of the spot on my reservation where Frank Reinhardt went. And then the back photos are all of the photos that were taken in prior, and the ones on either side on the booths, I don't know what you call that, displays, thank you. Those are all the exposition, the Indian Congress photos. We can go to the next slide. And it's so powerful. I actually wasn't there because it opened right at the sort of height of the pandemic. So the poor curator, Annika Johnson, had to install all of these. And I was there off and on virtually. So the first time I actually got to see it was last week in person at the Broad, and it is such a powerful work. And the thing that really strikes me is that everybody here has a story. And the beautiful thing is that they have their names and their tribal affiliations. So we now can actually just Google and find maybe a lot of information or maybe some information, and that's better than nothing. We can go to the next slide. And I have my very first monograph through Aperture that I'm actually going to be doing a book signing on Saturday for. I'm super excited about it, but again, my great-great-grandma is on the very front, and I'm just delighted about it. And I think we'll end there. There we go.
Thank you, Wendy. That was fantastic. I'm so in awe, and I love hearing the progression in your work. And I really want to see the work up that's right now at the Broad. But I do want to talk to you a little bit about, maybe if we move back in time, for your undergraduate degree in Montana, you studied art and Native studies. What were your history classes like for you as a child compared to your university experiences? And did you see yourself reflected in that curriculum?
Not at all. And I actually went to public school just like right off the reservation in this border town called Hardin, Montana. And it was a mixture of Crow kids and white rancher kids and mixed kids like myself. And I just remember how history was very boring. It's really crazy. And the fact that just like outside in the backyard of where the school was, as a metaphor, was the Crow Nation. And we did not once talk about the Crow Nation, even during Thanksgiving, when that is usually the time when Native people come up. So yeah, I think it's fascinating to me that now history is a big source of inspiration. And I think about, wow, if I would have known about some of these chiefs or some of these like cultural items that are imbued with such rich like symbolism and history, that would have really boosted my self-esteem as a little Crow kid. Like we would have had heroes, and it's just not represented in the history at all.
And so then when you went to university, you started learning a different kind of history?
So when I went, I decided to take Native Studies classes, and I'm always sort of, I joke a lot. So I thought, oh, this will be an easy class, because it's Native Studies or whatever. I had no idea what it was. And then what I found that it was just like all this information that I did not know at all. It were things that I would hear my dad say, like allotments, and I learned what the Dawes Allotment Act was, and like the whole history of the US government with Native people. And so that was just really stunning and also quite traumatizing, because it's not easy history. No. And it always seems like, well, I'm looking for a win here. Where is it? And I think that's why in my work, the thing that really inspires me is the resiliency of Indigenous people. And that's the thing that motivates me, and in the work that I produce as well.
I see that resilience come out at points with the color that you use in your work, because so many of the historic photographs that you're inspired by or that you're engaged with are black and white, or albumin silver, so kind of sepia toned. So I'm curious what you think about color in your work.
So amazing when you see that two belly image of him, and then you get blasted with the next slide of that an object, the similar object in reality, that jacket, and it's just bright. And then I think about him in such like saturation and brightness. It's beautiful. I mean, that is like, a stunning jacket. So for me, knowing growing up, participating in my community's event called Crow Fair, which is a cultural event, and me and my Apsáalooke dress that I wear a lot in different artworks, it's so colorful. And the beadwork that goes along with it, it's like these interesting geometric patterns or floral patterns. You might not think that they mix well, but everything sort of comes together. So it's super important for me to bring that out. And it's color to me is like life. So if I can bring that out in a historic object or a black and white photo, I'm going to try to do it.
And so, well, it also makes me think about history, right? And when you pull the events out of history, it dulls, the details fade away. And so when you have color in your work, it makes me remember that there's so much that we don't know in the photographs. So as someone who loves your work, I feel like there's a tension or duality in how you engage with archives, both personal and institutional, and whether you engage with them with annotations, physical touch, or just the photographs you find. You actively resist kind of the systems of control in the archives by humanizing them, I think. But you're also profoundly interested in what the archive can do and what it represents in its various forms. I'm wondering how you would describe your relationship with the archive.
You know what? I think, and this might sound weird, but I think what's happening is I'm becoming the archive. And I think ultimately that's what will be left behind.
I mean, you've also made all these connections, right? Through your research.
Yes, and I want to be the archive in that I want to be accessible for my community. I don't have to do some of the hard work of like piecing things together or trying to gain access. Like I've had problems with some institutions that won't let me have access to chrome materials. So I want to never do that, to my own community. So I'm feeling that that's where I'm headed to becoming the archive.
I think that's great. And I think what goes along with that is your use of annotations, because like you are building an archive with your script almost, and your annotations and your writing, it reoccurs in your work on the walls, in installations, and on photographs, 19th century photographs, and they function as a really important intervention. And what I like about seeing these notes in your hand is that it tells me that it's going to require close looking for myself, but also you have been looking really closely at these works, and they show me what you see, and I also can't take that for granted because everyone sees something different when they look at a photograph, right? So I'm wondering, like, how did this idea of annotations really come about? How, why, when? I mean, yeah.
Well, kind of exactly what you're saying, I really wanted to see. And I think we're like blasted with images all day long, that for me, it was a tool in which I could really force myself to see if that's like outlining in red pen, where, I'm actually physically going around parts of a chief's outfit and then realizing like all the chiefs are wearing brass rings. Oh, that's interesting. And then a question forms. Or if it's physically cutting things out, I'm like spending time and all the nuances of that and bringing in information that way. So I think it's about really seeing and actually slowing myself down. It forces me to slow down. And I've also noticed it forces the viewers to have to do that a little bit. And if they really want to get into it, they themselves, like you said, will end up seeing other things that I might not be picking up on, and adding to the narrative.
I just love it because it speaks to how you want to be an archive. You're creating an archive just by making those annotations and explaining it to viewers and to even your own family, maybe, who might not know the name of somebody that you've now found and made the link.
Yes.
So another theme that I see coming up a lot in your work is the idea of boundaries or land use. Yet you don't often picture land directly, like you sometimes do, but more often than not, you either are in the studio or you're doing something else. And so I'm wondering about like maps and cartography, because I've seen you employ those in, especially in the Anderson collection recent show. So I'm wondering, like, either what does the idea of land mean to you, or maps, or, you know, a combination of that?
It's something that I think is interesting, especially in reading in like historical documents of certain chiefs being asked by the US government to define Crow territory. And I think that's such a wildly abstract thing for Indigenous communities to think in land in that term. So it's sort of that tension between two ways of viewing like a Western and an Indigenous or an Apsáalooke way of viewing. And, you know, one of the first projects that I did where I was thinking about land was related to a chief named Sits in the Middle of the Land. And he was asked in the like I think it was like 1860s to define Crow territory. And he used the metaphor of a teepee. And he said, my home is where my teepee sits. And at first it's like, that's, you know, it's like being so literal about it, maybe being Western about, I was being Western about it. But the way that we set up teepees is with 4 foundation poles, and then the rest of the lodge poles go on and then the canvas or buffalo hide back in the day. But it's this 4-pole construction. And he basically then, you know, used that 4-pole construction to put a pole on each of the major migration routes that we took throughout the season and camped at. And that mapped out like over 38 million acres. And then he said, my home is where my teepee sits. And I just thought that was so powerful. And the teepee is also a metaphor of a mom. So I was thinking like, this is, you know, the earth is our mom, our teepee. And it's so different than map, a Western map that you draw on. And then just more recently with the Anderson collection, there is a Black map of the United States in which I had the students there put white flags on the map that represented the federally recognized tribes and the state recognized tribes. There aren't any unrecognized tribes, which there are by those 2 standards. Just because I wanted to see what in reality we're looking at where Native people have been placed. And I asked my dad, is there a word for like allotment? And he said, no, you know, there's no Crow word for allotment. And that in itself is interesting to me. And I said, well, then how do you guys talk about when you're talking about allotments? And he said, oh, we just say their land. And that like was a light bulb for me, because it's then, you know, switching to the way a Westerner would think about and sort of forcing that. So the title of that map is called Their Land, and it's complicated. And I don't know what that means. You could take it either way, or from wherever you're coming from, the meaning of what that means.
But it is really interesting to think about language and what that tells you about a culture and a community. There isn't a word for that, right?
Yeah.
I think that's really telling. We have 2 questions that have been submitted, so get ready. Just kidding. So Sandra Flores asks, in the image of you surrounded by food, can you tell us what are you telling the public with that display?
I'm talking about like where we are in our basically food for me. And growing up on the reservation, we used to get commodities, And so I remember getting commodities, and like anybody I talked to on the reservation, we were like, what's your favorite commodity? And mine's the cheese, sometimes the peanut butter. But not realizing that that was different until I left the reservation and, you know, went to grocery stores that had more options, and realizing, you know, this is like a lower economic issue that's happening. But for Native people, being put on a reservation, no longer being able to hunt with outside of the boundaries of the reservation, we were then given rations. So, you know, we were totally forced to change a whole way of eating, from, you know, hunting and gathering and roots and berries, and to flour and all sorts of things. And it really has really wrecked the health of many Native people. There's a huge problem of diabetes, all of that. So it was highlighting, you know, that is also what's killing us, is a sort of Western diet that has been forced on us. So that's what the foods are pointing towards. And those are foods very much that I ate and delighted in.
And they were processed foods. And
they were
of
all
course,
processed.
Yeah. And one final question. Okay, thank you so much for this incredible presentation, Wendy. I love that you are the archive and your thoughts about access. That is such a great way of putting it. I'm wondering what you might have seen change in both archival and museological practices since your days at the Natural History Museum in Los Angeles. Is any work easier? Is any work harder? What remains to be done? Great question.
Yeah, I think what can be really wonderful in my experience is when the people within the institution are really trying to do the hard work, recognizing that they need to work with the communities, and they need to provide access and figure out a solution for having those materials that they shouldn't have. I mean, they just shouldn't have those materials. So for me, when I am working with people in an institution who are motivated that way, that's totally different and exciting. The worst thing is to approach an institution and then have them sort of shut you down. And I think anytime that a community member from a tribe even makes that attempt to contact an institution and is even curious about their own material culture, the institution needs to just give them access. So I think that's what I would fight for, is doing that. And then from the community, let the community drive what happens to their own material cultures going forward.
And full access, right?
Full access.
Yes. And the ability to touch, I imagine, is important.
Yes, I mean, so the interesting thing at the National Museum of the American Indian, they let me physically touch things with my bare hands. And I know that that can be complicated in itself, because some of the objects aren't actually safe. Some of them have pesticides on them that aren't good to touch. Or, for instance, I've got this parfleche, which is a rawhide case, and some of the paint on it is actually mercury based. So some of these things are, you know, not good to touch with bare hands. But the fact that the National Museum of American Indian was open to that, and therefore I could actually touch a necklace that my great-great-grandfather wore, was powerful. So yeah, that kind of access is amazing.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, isn't in Crow culture, aren't objects, don't they have their own life too, or their own life force?
Yes, we actually have a lot of, not every object, but we actually have, our community for some reason has a lot of medicine bundles, and almost every community member had some sort of medicine bundle. And you know, when I'm saying medicine, you might think like Advil or something like that, but it's not. It's things that were basically would give the owner like power and protection. Like if they were out hunting, they would have like a bundle for that. Or crows really love to take horses from other communities in the area. We're really good at it. Some might say stealing, but we say getting. And so my fourth great grandfather had a horse getting bundle. They would open that bundle up. It would provide him protection so that he could go and get horses. And they say that those bundles are living things, and they are sung to and open during certain times and protected.
Thank you. Okay, I have one more question.
Okay.
One more final question, and then everyone can eat dinner. So Cyan asks, could you talk about your experience making art in college? Did you ever feel like the institution ever pushed you to hang your culture at the door, or
100%. Yeah, that was the case, and it's I think that's so hard for anybody who is making identity-based artwork, especially if it's culturally specific. I feel like that work can be hard and complicated, and really kind of shed on not you, but the lack of knowledge that other people have. And therefore, sometimes they'll try to shut you down to say, don't make that, so that you can make things that are easier for me to talk about, that I understand. And I guess what I learned is that that's actually not my problem.
Sure. That's
their problem. They need to work out. And what I need to do is to continue to make the work that I need to make. It's important and it's necessary. And I can't wait for somebody to figure, or some institution to figure their stuff out. You need to
do what's best for you. Okay, really final question. Could you talk just a little bit about, the question is, can you tell me a little bit about your last name?
Red Star, yeah. So Red Star is actually my great grandfather's name. So when I talked about allotments, what ended up happening, they put Native people on various reservations, and then they then sort of allotted that land within the reservation, because they wanted Native people to assimilate into like farming style, or also they wanted to open up surplus land to settlers. So when they were allotting the Crow reservation, my grandfather was of the age where he was head of household of that time period. And so his name was just Red Star. So everybody just had a name. And so he was head of household, and then all his family members within his household were given like a Christian name. And then his name was used as a last name. So it's amazing because all the Crow tribal members, and I think a lot of other Native nations is the same deal. Their name actually comes from an ancestor, and it was just their name.
I think that's a good note for us to end on. And I have to say thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate you being here and talking with me this evening.
Thank you, Shana. It's such an honor.